Despite early failures, unmanned aerial vehicles are a significant part of the Russian military's ongoing war against Ukraine. The commitment to robotics and autonomous weapons will continue to shape Moscow's strategy for future wars. That's according to Samuel Bendett. He's an advisor with CNA's Russia Studies program. Sam, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So I want to start with Putin's trip to Iran. U.S. intelligence says that Iran will supply Russia with hundreds of drones. What do you think this means, and why now?
Well, I think it's an estimation of the fact that a lot of Russian UAVs, a lot of Russian military equipment in general, has been lost over Ukraine. Russia is looking to replenish the stocks with specific types of unmanned aerial vehicles, such as combat UAVs, such as loitering munitions. In other words, the type of drones that it actually lacks in great numbers to make significant headway against the Ukrainian military. And Iran is one of the two nations that has a very close military-to-military relationship with Russia, the other country being China. Iran is also one of the most significant drone fielding nations in the world. It has had its drone program for the last several decades, and it developed it under significant sanctions pressure from the United States. In other words, in many ways, Iranian drone program is relatively sanctions-proof. And Iran has been using its military drones through their proxies and allies all across the Middle East, through their Yemeni allies, through their Hezbollah allies, through their allies in Syria and Iraq. So Iranian drones are actually combat-proof. They were able to operate in a very complex environment across the Middle East. They were able to operate with significant American air defenses in place in nations like Saudi Arabia and UAE that Iranian drones have struck. And Russia considers Iran to be one of the key nations around the world that stands up to the American and Western pressure, and it is seeking to build a better strategic relationship with the Islamic nation.
So, Sam, early on, Russia in the war, Russia wasn't really relying on its drones. How has that changed in recent months?
You're right. Early on in the war, in the first couple of weeks, a lot of observers noticed that Russia isn't really following its own military playbook. When it invaded Ukraine in the opening weeks of the war, it really didn't follow its own tactics and concepts. And unmanned aerial vehicles was strangely absent in that initial assault. As the weeks went by, as the months went by, Russian military went back to its tactics that it has practiced, drilled, and it started using a significant number of unmanned aerial vehicles over Ukraine. Most of those unmanned aerial vehicles are relatively small and light. They provide intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and target acquisition for Russia's long-range artillery and multiple launch rocket systems. In fact, drones as artillery spotters is one of the main roles that drones play today over Ukraine, both for the Russian and the Ukrainian militaries. Russia also has a relatively small number of combat UAVs that it also tried to field over Ukraine. There are a few videos of those UAVs available, and Russia pledged that it would start using loitering munitions over Ukraine. This is one of the technologies that Russia observed that was used with great effect in the Nagorno-Karabakh war in 2020 in next door Azerbaijan and Armenia, when the Azerbaijani military used a combination of combat UAVs and loitering drones with ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance drones with great effect against the Armenian military. And so Russia said in late June that it started using more loitering munitions against the Ukrainians. But again, this is all about the numbers. How many of those does Russia have? How many of those did Russia lose? Russia went into the war with an approximately 2,000 strong UAV fleet. The number 2,000 has been kind of bounced around for several years across the Russian Ministry of Defense. It's a relatively believable number considering the size and the scale of the Russian military. But most of those drones were actually for gathering intelligence. Russia really lacks a significant number of combat UAVs, a gap that it has repeatedly acknowledged and a gap that it has pledged to close in the coming years as Russia brings up its military factories online to manufacture a growing number of combat UAVs as well as combat helicopter type UAVs as well.
And are the drones and the robotics that we're seeing, are they the highest level of tech advancement we've seen them use in this war?
Well, they definitely represent sort of a pinnacle of aerial warfare right now in Ukraine. Obviously, no drone, no matter how big or capable, can be compared to a manned fighter. a fighter jet that can carry more munitions, has a experienced pilot in the seat. But combat drones and some of the more advanced intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance drones are actually relatively sophisticated. What we are seeing is the change in tactics, how both countries' militaries, both countries' allies fighting this war are actually starting to change their own tactics, their own ways of fighting by incorporating a growing number of different types of UAVs into their fight, especially when it comes to the commercial drones that are now getting increasingly widely used across Ukraine, both by the Russian military and their allies from Donbass, as well as by the Ukrainian military and their volunteers. Some of these drones are becoming a lot more sophisticated. Some of the drones actually start using image recognition software. There's also a lot of deliberation whether or not some of the drones used in the war are equipped with artificial intelligence. I think if this war continues for a long time, we're going to see a growing share of sophistication amongst the UAV fielding and development in this conflict.
All right. Well, Sam, I appreciate you being on the program with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.